Hello, friendly neighborhood nerds. If you want to hear interviews from industry pros, get first looks, and have access to endless comic content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell!
What's up, friendly neighborhood nerds? This is Judah Rad, and I'm here with Robo Strange and Respawn, and today we have a very, very special guest. He's an illustrator and political cartoonist and has illustrated covers for Time, Newsweek, Business Week, and The Progressive. He's done hundreds of illustrations for publications like The New York Times, Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, and The New Yorker. In addition to co-founding World War III Illustrated, he's also helmed Spy vs. Spy for Mad Magazine since 1997. Peter Kuper, welcome to our show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So you're
Yeah.
you're a very unique guest for us. Typically, we interview comic book creators, people who write like superheroes and like sci-fi and other type of like action genre fiction, and you're primarily a political cartoonist. I would like to know what we in the superhero world would call your origin story.
Well, I mean, I started with superheroes. I grew up reading comics.
There you go.
I think Thor, Lee Kirby, when I was 7, rocked my world. And Spider-Man, of course, and all that. And then as I started going to comic conventions I became a rabid fan pretty early on, fortunately for me. So in 1970, when I was 11, that I went to a Detroit Triple Fanfare Comic Con. Jim Stranko was a guest, Bernie Wrightson was a guest, and you know, Bernie Wrightson and some of these people were like the very beginning of their careers. And but I also saw there some underground comic things. Spain Rodriguez, Robert Crumb. There was some zines that had their work, or there's small publications, newspapers, and it was just sort of like this in left field thing. Like, what's this that's not superheroes? And then in the pretty early on, in fact, even at that point, my friend Seth DeBachman and I, this is growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, we started doing a fanzine. We were, and this was in a time period where it was all so small that you kind of could meet anybody who read comics, say in Cleveland, which was Don and Maggie Thompson, by the way. And we met, who, I don't know if I throw out names and you don't know who they are, you can either ask me or I'll just keep going.
Yeah,
but
usually we just nod and pretend we knew. Oh, yeah.
Okay, fine. No, well, anyway, they were doing the comics buyer's guide for a while. They were comics people going way back. And so Seth and I were doing this fanzine, which gave us an intro. I mean, I barely drew at all, and Seth had more drawing chops that I was always jealous of. But we'd go to comic conventions. We started going to the New York Comic Convention in 1971, and there was Sergio Aragonés, there was Will Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman, and wow. All those people were there, and I mean, to me, it was the highlight of my year. And because we were doing a fanzine, it gave us the opportunity to actually interview these people, have a reason to say, hey, I have my little tape recorder, and do what you guys are doing now.
Yeah.
And
that's cool.
As a 12-year-old, and the amazing thing is, it was so early on in the forum that these guys were all like, sure, yeah, I'll talk to you. We interviewed Jack Kirby. We interviewed William Gaines, and and got very, sometimes people were very candid. Jack Kirby was a little more reserved, like, this isn't what I share with fans, but he was completely willing to talk to us, and that it was just so incredibly exciting, and it was an opportunity for me as a kid to see how adults did this job. And being around it all the time, osmosis, if nothing else, was a huge help. Then a very strange set of circumstances, I found a bunch of 78 RPM records in my parents' basement that were left there by the previous owner. And in Cleveland was, I was coming home from buying comics one day, and a young guy saw me with comics and said, oh, there's a guy who has comics over there. And I just thought it was my God-given right to meet anybody who had a comic even. And I went over and I rang this guy's doorbell. And it turned out it was a guy named Harvey Picar, who was he wasn't doing comics at all. He didn't end up doing American Splendor for another, say, 5 years, and he was a guy who worked at a hospital, and but he was friends with Robert Crumb, as it happened, and Robert Crumb was a big enthusiast for 78 RPM records.
Okay.
And at some point or another, we were having like a backyard sale, and my parents said, whatever money you can get for those records, you can keep. The owner had said, yeah, I don't care. It's just a box of old records. And I was sitting out there, had them out in the sun, and some collector came and he wanted to buy all of them. And being a comic book person, I smelled collector and I went, wait a minute. And I remembered, oh yeah, Harvey Picar, he has a bunch. In his apartment, he had a whole bunch of 78 RPM records. So I called him up and goes, don't sell to that guy, I'll be right over. He said, oh yeah, Crumb would be interested in a bunch of these. And I did a trade through the mail, courtesy of Harvey, of like 15 records with the agreement that Crumb would send me an interview, would respond to an interview, and send me some artwork. And Seth and I typed up this interview with questions like, could you give us a rundown on the history of underground comics? And, what kind of pen nib do you use? And, like, should comics always have a message and things like that? And Crumb, about 6 months later, I got it back. It included an original from one of a classic underground comic, Unita Comics, to be specific.
Wow.
Do you still have that?
Yeah, I do. In fact,
Oh,
It's
wow.
been on my wall since then. And I rode home on my bike holding it in my hand, and at one point it fluttered out of my hand into the road, and fortunately no cars were coming, and I rode back and got it.
That's amazing.
That is
You're very
pretty awesome.
valuable. I have that work. So then I did this interview with Crumb. Excuse me, I'll wrap up quick.
No,
Oh,
go ahead.
no.
With this interview, Seth and I typed up this interview. We sent it to him, gave him all this room. So could you give us a rundown on the history of underground comics? We left this giant space for him to answer. He just wrote no. These penciled answers. And then, his hobbies were taking drugs and fucking and it blew my hair back at age 12.
Yeah.
And when, and we published this in our fanzine. And the previous issue of the fanzine, we could barely sell, I don't know, we sold 10 copies.
Yeah.
This one, curiously, we sold out of the 100-copy print run. And,
So you're 12. You're 12 years old, and there's an issue that you have of a hobby you were doing that had 100 prints of it. Like, who's helping you with this? Is somebody? You had a mentor at the time, or your parents?
No. Seth's dad had a friend who was a printer, and we were around going to come. It was just completely hit or miss. The first fanzine we did, we stapled. It was just printed single sheets, and we stapled it. But then the printer suggested, you can do something where you print it longer, but we were hand stapling everything. I had a long arm stapler we got from, one of our father's offices, and so it was very. It was pretty progressive, all things being equal, for being 12.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate because coming into fandom at an early point meant that I got to meet a lot of these creators. Robert Crumb came through town and stayed with Harvey. I went over there, and he did the cover for our fanzine and trade for more records. Came over to my house. I had nothing to say to him. It was a real drag because I didn't draw. I wasn't even old enough to buy underground comics.
That's right. Yeah.
But bless the head shops in the neighborhood where there was some guy selling patchouli, Indian tapestry.
Yeah.
Come here, I got some. Had a box of amazing underground comics, and so I was buying them underage, which was like the closest I got to a combination of really interesting drug-infused comics and pornography.
No, that's pretty awesome. I feel like I have to say this because it's super obvious. When you were talking earlier, anybody watching this video can tell that me and Aaron and Rhea, I try not to look. I was trying to look at you, are trying not to laugh. Like I'm dying laughing, only because that you're talking like what you just described, what you were doing at 12 is what we're doing at 30 and 40 years old. But you're like living the life already, going to Comic-Con, selling books, and we're like, holy crap! Like, yeah, you already lived the life.
You can make it a lifetime hobby.
Yeah.
Well,
it's pretty awesome.
I mean, so to fast forward, so Seth Tabachman and Seth moved to New York when he was 18, I think. I followed also when I was 18, or he might have been 19. But anyway, we ended up in the same art school together, Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And kind of incidentally, he was interested in film and went to NYU. And then that was just too complicated. And he was like, I still like comics. And I was like, I still like comics. And curiously, we've gone through these phases of, superheroes were kind of falling away, although not really, because another set of circumstances that came out of having gone to comic conventions. When I was 11 or 12, I met Howard Chaykin, who was a fan artist. And I bought a sketch from him, which he was going to send me for my fanzine, and he didn't for like 2 years. But this created a connection where I was like always angry, and he was like, yeah, leave me alone. Oh, right, I got to get you that. And when I moved to New York, I bumped into him at a comic convention, and he said, I need an assistant. What are you doing? And I was like, and I almost no skills at all. And he hired me to work at Upstart Studios, which included Walt Simonson, Val Merrick, James Sherman, Jim Starlin was in there, and then later Frank Miller. It was just starting on Daredevil, and so I got to be I was
and you're 13 now at this point in your life.
Close. No, I was 19 when I started working for Howard.
Nice.
So there were all these just weird, crossroads that happened, because of having crossed paths with Howard at that point. He just, he barely knew me. I'd see him at comic conventions, that he hired me, and I really had super limited skills. I came to New York hoping to be an animator because I thought, well, I can just barely draw, and I had barely done any comics. I was drawing in my sketchbook primarily, and I thought I could do animation. I could just paint blue backgrounds until I get more skills. And I came to New York on spring break from my first year of college, which was at Kent State. And amazingly, with my sketchbook, I went around to animation houses, and a guy said he'd give me a job. And I was like, fantastic. And I moved to New York for this job. And when I got here, he didn't even remember who I was. And he was like, oh yeah, that film, yeah, we wrapped that up, and animation is on a downturn, and no, I don't have any work. And I was in New York, so I stayed. But I drew sketches in the street for a while. I finally wandered around. I got a little bit of illustration work, but then I was at a newsstand, and I noticed Harvey Comics was in New York, and I thought I could maybe be an inker for Harvey Comics.
Yeah.
I was a closet Richie Rich fan, so and Little Dot and Lada and Casper and all that.
Sure.
So I went to their offices, and they had me do samples, and I spent a month doing samples, not paid. And then they went, they're okay. Do another couple of weeks of samples, and they hired me to be an inker, and it took me a day and a half to ink the first one page that they gave me, and I got paid $6. So it wasn't looking like a good career arc, but very helpful with my with just getting some technical skills together. And I did it for a year and a half. The pay went up to $10, and I got a little faster, but not so much that it was ever worthwhile. But I was doing that. I was in school, and I was working at Upstarts with Chaykin. And so that combination of things helped me start to get my shit together in comics.
I have to wonder how often that happens, because we've only been doing this a few months now, and now this is the second time I've heard the story of somebody says, "Come out to the big city." Rodney Barnes actually told us a story about how somebody famous he wouldn't name said, "Come out to L.A." and then when he got there, got ghosted and said, "Nope, never mind, just kidding." And so
what? Just kidding? Wow, that's tough.
yeah, it was. Yeah, he said he got ghosted. We tried to figure out who this person is, but he wouldn't tell us. So,
well, I know. I remember I went to a talk that Ralph Bakshi gave when he had done Lord of the Rings, really horrifically bad animated feature.
Yeah.
And somebody from the audience came up to him at the end and screamed at him. And I went over to the guy and was like, "What was that about?" And he said, he told me that he was going to give me a job, and I gave up my apartment in New York, moved to LA, and he never gave me a job. And it was the first time this guy had seen him. So maybe it was Ralph Bakshi,
Yeah. So, in a lot of ways, go into like what you do now, like what your bread and butter. You have a unique challenge of having to say more with less, right? So the very like the one panel kind of cartooning that you do versus the people that we usually interview with that have 22 pages or whole volumes of work to tell a message. Is that a difficult skill to hone?
I guess I'd say yes, but it's not. It wasn't obviously like it was a difficulty because I was drawn to. I'm drawn to the forms, which includes illustration, gag cartoons, political cartoons, comics. I mean, I just finished this month the paperback edition of Heart of Darkness that the graphic novel. Is just coming out, so I'm very ensconced in doing long form things as well. I just did that, finished that last year.
Okay.
And the year before that, I did a graphic novel called Kafkaesque, that was a collection of 14 Franz Kafka short stories, all done in pretty elaborate comic styles. So I'm jumping back and forth with long form and then pitching cartoons to the New Yorker and the Nib, and there's another site called Weekly Humorist, and so these smaller places. But to tell you the truth, part of it is that what runs through a lot of these things is I have a great amount of anxiety about the political climate now more than ever. Period. Although I did a book for Fantagraphics in 1988, I think it was, called "It's Only a Matter of Life and Death," because I was deeply worried about the environment, and I was doing, some humorous things, but I did a lot of work for heavy metal, and that there was always this sort of like through line of some kind of message or commentary on a number of different things, not just, it wasn't a one-shot thing, because I certainly have done autobiography that isn't like about the environment or about, politicians. But I'm really feeling anxious about doing this commentary, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. I did it with illustration for many years, and that's where I got work for Time and things like that. A lot of that contracted after the crash in 2008. And I also had spent a couple of years living in Mexico. My wife and daughter and I moved to Mexico in 2006 because we wanted our daughter to get a second language and get a different cultural experience. And also she was in school, but I love traveling, and there was a way to like be stationary but really feel like you were traveling, which it did. And when I came back from Mexico, where I had done a lot of drawing in my sketchbook, I was feeling kind of removed from the stylistic direction I had gone for years, which was using stencils and spray paint. And I did the system for Vertigo in stencils and spray paint. I did a book called Sticks and Stones, all in stencils and spray paint, graphic novels. I adapted Upton Sinclair's The Jungle in 1990 for first, when they were doing their Classics Illustrated line. That was all in stencils and spray paint. Highly toxic. I literally use cut paper and then use spray cans. Wow. And I did my illustration career was all that right up until I went to Mexico, and I just got really, I got tired of that form, and Bush was leaving by the time we got back, and Obama was coming in, and I was just kind of worn out from my rabid, foaming at the mouth anger about everything that was happening under Bush. And it wasn't like everything was fixed with Obama, but I just was in a gear shift. And in my career, that's happened 3 or 4 times where I have a stylistic direction that feels solid, and then I just get bored with it. It seems like stencil and spray paint has lasted for years and years, and I occasionally will still do something in that form if it seems like the appropriate thing, but no long form anything. And that actually, I'm meandering here a bit, but that's how I got the Spy vs. Spy gig, because they asked me to try out for it, and I was really not anxious I wasn't like jumping over this possibility, because I had just finished the system and I was doing a lot of other things, and I had a show, an animated show I was working on with HBO, and I saw a lot of my own thing, and so to take over somebody else's characters and do that, so I did it in stencils and spray paint as my trial one, and I assumed they'd hate it and it would be all over with. And I go, look, see, but I thought if I do get the gig, it'll be clearly I've done something that's altered it, and so that I'm not just following if I really wanted it, I would have like mimicked Proteus and done the style, trying to slavishly look like that, and I wouldn't have gotten it. And instead, I was really like, it doesn't really. If it doesn't happen, no biggie. And then of course I did get it, and then I was like almost cowed when it happened. Like, okay, now I've said yes, but I'll do it for a year or two, and then a couple years into it, just when it was sort of like, well, I feel like it's getting a little played out, it went from black and white to color, which opened up a lot of different doors, and I was still doing stencil. But when I was in Mexico, there I was still doing this as stencils and spray paint, but everything else I did was like drawing in my sketchbook and drawing from life in different areas. And when I got back, it just happened that they said, oh, hey, you want to change up the style a little bit, because we're just for the difference. And I was like, as a matter of fact, exactly, that's perfect. So I've had this, there's been some good fortune, but also I think I might have even proposed that at a certain point, because I've been I can't be around any more spray paint. 20 years has been enough.
I bet.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, meandering. So one thread I dropped when I got to New York, and Seth and I were both in art school. What you had said before about here you are 40 and you're still doing this thing. So Seth and I were still interested in comics, but Underground Comics had kind of crashed and burned. They closed down head shops, so the distribution was gone, and it was just getting a little played out. And this is in 1979. And Seth and I still wanted to do comics I expected I'd go into Underground Comics, and that wasn't there. But I was really interested in the form, and Seth and I just like, well, we've done a fanzine together. We can, so we started this magazine, World War III Illustrated. Well, we just finished the latest issue. It's just coming out this month. So as far as continuing the thread of doing a fanzine, still dealing with printers, still looking, doing that whole process of assembling, figuring it out, putting, now it's done through computers, in terms of InDesign and that assembly, what used to be paste ups. And, but it's the same deal. And it's like, in a lot of ways, and I'm still always bitching and griping about how hard the process is, and like, why are we doing this magazine? Nobody's paid. It's all to be an editor. It just means I get to do a lot more work, and I'm hated more by the people.
Yeah.
We didn't publish. We're dealing with distribution and printers and all that kind of stuff. So it's really following in those footsteps but I'm always at the end of the process. I'm like, really like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm really glad we're doing it, because there's work that you can get in there. There's work by people that's out there that doesn't have any other venue really, or rarely. And even though we, don't sell a lot, and it's, and we're virtually unknown, and we've been doing it for 41 years. It's like this, but to me, there's a subset of people who have known it, or have seen it, that cross paths with it, and they're like, what, this odd thing. And I think it continues to serve its purpose, even if it's on a small level of impact. It hasn't changed the world the way I would have wanted it to. We were talking, the things that we were talking about in the first issue, we're still dealing with and actually we're dealing with the outcome of the things we were waving our arms around about in comics, going, like, we really, environmental issues, nuclear weapons. Ronald Reagan was just coming into office, which is why we titled it World War III Illustrated, because it was like we felt pretty certain that there was going to be a nuclear war. And, I assume because we published the magazine that's why there wasn't a nuclear war. So there is that. So.
World peace, settled.
You do what you
got
can.
It.
Hey, I'm going to take us back to something a bit more depressing, Peter, and I'm sorry.
But more depressing than World War.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Well, I mean, it's basically the same, but we're in a tumultuous political climate at the moment, to say the least. And you mentioned before that obviously you've had some moments in your career where your feelings have changed. But I want to know, is part of the frustration that you have when you're producing this content, does it ever feel like you're just like screaming into an echo chamber? Like, so much of your work will only be seen by like-minded liberals instead of the type of people that you want to be lampooning. How do you deal with those feelings?
Well, I guess I deal with it because people aren't born political. They don't start out with a predisposed, any more than anybody's born racist. It's the things that I think about that develop my own sensibilities, my own political sense, and all that came from comics in a lot of ways, and then the things I read as I got more, as I expanded my literary background, and that I take some solace in that notion. It's not like I'm not frustrated and I don't feel like, oh well, why am I doing this? This is insane that I'm doing these drawings about Trump and I'm commenting it all the time, and is it not just an echo chamber? Is it not just throwing a pebble in the ocean and doesn't even make a ripple? But then it's really important that we don't find ourselves at a place where we're so paralyzed by the circumstances that you don't feel like you can get out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I know I rely on Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers and Samantha Bee and John Oliver and Jimmy Kimmel and all that. And the other like-minded artists to make me feel like, okay, some of it and Trevor Noah especially, helps to unpack what's going on so that I can actually look at it and not just want to slash my wrists, like just have a
you don't feel like you're alone when
That's
you're
right.
like it's nice to not be alone.
Yeah, but it's not just that, because it's like what makes a movement besides people feeling like they're coalescing.
That's
and then
right.
there's have a flag that you're marching under to whatever extent you do. And I never was a sing-along person. My family was all like, let's do the sing-along. And I'd be, why I'm not singing along. So I hate these group things. But I realize I'm actually very much, I ended up knowing all the lyrics. And so
That's right.
Some later date I was singing along. But it's important to have these things that are connective tissue in order to rally at times that are really desperate. And what's going on right now, I mean, with the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement and all the actions that are going on where people are out in the street about police brutality and all that, it's really kind of a remarkable state of people taking action. And I think that art has an important role, music does, and theater, and that the arts, signs that people do. And sometimes, in the climate change marches that I've been to, there's always this really great combination of some very humorous things, and people, they're talking about some very desperate, serious topics, but then bringing an artistic response to it. And I feel like comics have saved my life, and music has saved my life, and all these art forms, literature, theater, all that, movies that have made me feel like connected to something and like excited about responding to it and feel the heart to move on. So in that respect, it's like I think at a time like this more than ever, art plays a very important role, and that it's not always clear, and you can definitely say, the paper can burn as quickly as anything, and those ideas can disappear. But I think that they register in people's minds, and people who are coming to it for the first time might see a piece of art that resonates with them, whereas a important diatribe doesn't. And so a single image, and even when it's giving you a laugh. And I feel like I have that role in the cartoons I do for the New Yorker. Especially, I do mostly they have a daily online part of the New Yorker, and that can be edgier and can be really of the moment. In fact, it has to be of the moment. So I'm waking up in the morning, horrifically looking at my news feed, reading the paper, and then trying to come up with a sketch by 9 a.m., which is the deal. And then by 9:30, I either hear from them or I don't. And mostly, 90% of the time you don't. It's a very beating your head against the wall thing that it's like, one of the things I talk about in teaching is like failure is like it's a critical skill to have, the ability to fail and then pick yourself up as though that didn't not have that stop you from doing the next thing. And that would apply to so many different things, but just like having my failure muscle is like, I'm like Popeye, because it's like virtually every day I have the enthusiasm to think that this idea is smart enough that the New Yorker will want to buy it, or someplace like that. And actually the New Yorker, there are very few places at this point. And when it doesn't go, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that. And sometimes I will push and like write the cartoon editor and say, I really thought that was a good idea, and what happened there? And they'll go, oh yeah, maybe we'll run that tomorrow, and they do. So sometimes my absolute, the gumption of it will help me, but sometimes I just pitch it elsewhere and find the Nation will publish an occasional thing. Not a lot of money floating around all these things, but it's a cross section of things. It's just to have a career doing cartooning of the sort that I do requires like just kind of a constant scramble, because I don't have like a book I'm working on all the time. I mean, occasionally, yes, but then, I depend on pixie dust a lot of the time to make a living. And also I have a working wife, but we pulled together on this.
Yeah.
And
so you talked a little bit about your political work from earlier. And one thing that when you talk to people about what's happening right now, it's like equal parts unprecedented, and then but also with this is nothing new, the medium is new. So with you talking about your start from when you were 12 freaking years old to through working all various mediums, what would you say? Would you say that when you're looking at the work that you're doing, are we unprecedented, or is this how things have always been and we're just now sitting noticing it?
When you say unprecedented in terms of love, like that this is material that's being done in comics?
Well, as far as the political work, because you talked about earlier how it is, the political climate can bum you out.
It's an unprecedented time.
Right. Yeah. So
it's certainly, on so many different counts that's true. I'm not sure this is the answer to your question, but there's so many different edges to the political circumstance. I mean, I feel like we're on the edge of fascism, a real genuine fascist takeover. I was just reading today that what's his name, Stone, was recommending to Trump that in the event he doesn't win the election, that he declare martial law.
Yep.
Right.
There's I mean, this year is probably the most treacherous and dangerous, I think, actually, in human history. It will probably escalate in different ways, and we could change the course of it. But even Trump not even being in office doesn't mean that suddenly there's not forest fires in California.
That's right.
And that I mean, there's a lot of undoing that we'll have to do to get have an environment that we can work in back on track. So all that's going on, which is, at the same time, I mean, I feel like, and with the pandemic going on, which is, fortunately here we are all without masks on. If one of you had a mask on, that would probably have been the first thing I talked about. But the idea that we're in this science fiction surreal world. At the same time, I feel like if there was ever a time to be happy, now is a good time to do it, because it can get a lot worse, and that if you have food and shelter, you're already doing pretty well in this insane environment.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to remind myself of the fortune of a beautiful day and really all the things that are in place that are really fantastic. I have a good group of friends. I have a happy marriage. I got a great 23-year-old daughter. There's a lot of things like that I'm just in my own little bubble, at least. I'd be a jerk if I was just walking around being totally pessimistic.
Sure.
I also can draw my way out of the horror by every time I draw, I get all excited, and it breaks the ice block that is my terror. But hilariously, what I'm drawing is the terror, and it helps me exercise it, which is, again, like, just really, I feel fortunate because I have that outlet. But so I do feel like I'm staring into the abyss a lot of the time, because I am looking at my news feed. I'm keeping up with what's going on all the time, as much as I can bear, so that I can comment on it and digest it in some way. But having an outlet, and it doesn't always work. I mean, I definitely blow a gasket periodically, and I realize the scrim between this happiness I'm talking about and it falls down, and there's the world out there with a pandemic and people suffering all over, that it's a thin line, and I feel very conscious of that as well.
Awesome.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it did. It just, I wanted to hear your opinion, just because that is what you do so much of, political commentary and stuff like that. So,
Peter, so you contributed to Gangland by Brian Azzarello back in 1998. That's I think you mentioned it earlier, the system that Vertigo 3-pager. It's a cool story. It's like tells like a very cyclical story of picking the poppy flower, and then the entire drug trade ending in violence, but then it ends with that blood splatter of like the final act of violence forming the flower, and almost like restarting the entire thing. It was really cool. It's something I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
What was it like working on that project?
Well, that was, I had done the system, which is a mostly wordless graphic novel, and that opened the door for the editor there, Lou Stathis, and actually Axel Alonso was his assistant at the time.
Oh, nice.
It was really, and again, that's another one of those like funny. Axel Alonso. Next time I looked, he was like heading Marvel, and actually,
editor-in-chief. Yeah.
As when he was an editor there, he brought me in, and I did a Captain America Red, White, and Blue, like a 2-page wordless piece for that was completely loco as well. That was, I had Captain America fighting the Red Skull. He throws his shield, knocking the Red Skull, and then Captain America sees himself in a window, his reflection, and he notices that his A is an N, and then he rips his shirt back, and it's a swastika, and then he takes his mask off, and he's Hitler. And then the Red Skull and Captain America embrace in a heart-shaped panel, and the last shot is Captain America waking up in bed going, I can't have any more of the rare bit cheese rations.
What a nightmare.
Which is a reference to the Winsor McCay Dream of the Rarebit Fiend, which is an old turn-of-the-century comic strip. Okay. I did originally have Bucky Barnes in bed with Captain America, which is the one thing that they did nix. They were like, okay, a little too far. Bucky and Cap together thing.
We would have. We have a moderator that would have loved that.
Yeah.
Ainsley would have been almost.
You can find this online. It's out there. But anyway, so with Gangland, so I was just kind of keeping up the wordless storytelling circular thing that I was doing a lot in the system. But I also I started a comic strip that ran in the New York Times for 6 months called Eye of the Beholder, and I actually have 2 book collections of that out that came out years ago. And it's a wordless comic, and it does this little cycling, and you don't know whose perspective you're going to have until the last panel. And so it might be the perspective of an insect, or it might be the perspective of a rat on the Titanic, looking at the rich people who don't realize, whatever it might be. And curiously, Charlie Hebdo, the French publication where all the people were killed, that's currently having the trial. They got killed in, I think it was 14 people got killed in 2 different locations, but that was in
5 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago.
It was 5 years.
Yeah.
And the trial is going on right now.
Wow.
Well, incidentally, I sent one of my comic strip ideas that was like that thing that I did for Gangland to Charlie Hebdo and said, I don't know if you take unsolicited submissions. It was a 4-panel wordless comic. And they said, oh yeah, we really like this. And how would you like to do a weekly comic strip for us?
Wow.
And for our environmental column. So I'm doing an environmental comic every week for Charlie Hebdo now.
That's awesome.
So another one of those, it's like I said, I survive on pixie dust. So I
They just recently reprinted their one that they got bombed for. Hey, is that right, Charlie Hebdo?
They did. They had a cover that included kind of all of the offensive Muhammad cartoons together, and the headline says something like "all that for this," so they did. And when they did their issue, they did a special issue about the killings. They said, "Hey, would you like to do a comic for that issue?" And I just was like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
I'm supposed to come up with something that is like hasn't been done before in a wordless format. And I started looking at pictures of all the surrounding imagery that came with that. And I was looking at, there was also a Jewish grocery store that got attacked and 4 people killed there as well. And one of the photos in front of the grocery store had a French flag, and somebody had put the names of all the Charlie Hebdo artists who had been killed, and there were all these flowers stacked up there as they do, like when there's a killing, they do that with, George Floyd memorial location, people pile flowers. So this 4-panel comic starts with, it's like a commercial terrarium, not a terrarium, but like a greenhouse. And then the next panel shows all these flowers that have grown, and then the next panel shows a flower shop, and then with a woman walking away with some flowers, and the last panel is in front of the store where all the people were killed with all the names of them that was based on this photo, and the flowers have now ended up getting there. And I was like, okay, I think I got something here. And they were very enthusiastic in it. And I'd been doing it since January, but I felt like that was when we kind of came together, where I felt like now I'm part of Charlie Hebdo. I managed to participate in some very, very small way.
Did you see did you watch the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where Larry David, there's like a fatwa on Larry David?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's gonna be
what button can you possibly push that will cause more trouble? Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned World War III Illustrated earlier, I think, and I personally have never read it before, but after researching this episode, it definitely seems like something I would enjoy. So just real quick, for people who haven't read it before, do you have like a quick pitch to tell us what it's about and why we should read it?
The latest issue is titled "The World We're Fighting For," and our most optimistic issue ever. We started working on it a year ago, pre-COVID, pre the current Black Lives Matter movement, and or pre George Floyd at least. And we had to, basically rejigger the whole issue around a pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement and all that. And all these people were doing all this kind of work. In a lot of ways, like if you see signage at a rally, or you might see a poster on a wall, and then it disappears and you haven't seen it anymore. We're grabbing those things and we're making sure that history doesn't get forgotten. And there's a lot of history like that people might spray paint on a wall. I mean, what Banksy does is a perfect example of the kind of thing, notion that we have in our work where we might do something sequential, but that, it's very ethereal in some ways, but we're using comics as our means of political commentary in a lot of ways. And so what we're trying to do is particularly use a form of comics as and kind of carry on the underground comic tradition of comics like Slow Death and some of the comics that talked about environmental issues and things like that. That's where I learned about a lot of those things. And then and fine art. There's we have kind of a cross section of fine artists that are involved in it. Sometimes we're using people who are doing some of their very first work in comics. Somebody like Baron Story, who I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a teacher at when we were at Pratt Institute years ago, and he ended up getting into doing some more comic-like things. But he had a pretty big influence on a whole bunch of other cartoonists. But he did his first comic for World War III. And people like Bill Sienkiewicz are fans of his work. There is no or very few other outlets, consistent outlets like World War III, that use comics in this way, that you use them with political content. And there's we have autobiography, and there's not exactly an elevator pitch for World War III. It's because it's a cross section of things. We've done 51 issues of it. The latest issue is 240 pages. We're now as a kind of like a book, so that we stay on the shelf longer than we were as a magazine. But you'll see things in there. There was a book that came out from Vertigo called 7 Miles a Second years ago. In its entirety, it ran in World War III first. We were publishing that first. It then got picked up by Vertigo. Eric Drucker, who does covers for the New Yorker now, did a book called Flood, which first was serialized in World War III, then won an American Book Award when it came out as a graphic novel. We were doing things like that, predating the graphic novel explosion, because we would start to do those things in the same way. It was the magazine itself functions as the vehicle for giving people an opportunity to do this kind of work, which they might not otherwise have, and be in an environment that encourages that. I always felt kind of ripped off, because I thought you'd always hear about the Beat Generation or Summer of Love, hippie movement, all these things. And I was always too young for them. I was always thought I wish there was a group like that. And World War III, in a certain way, has created that artistic grouping where we have connected with people like Sue Coe, who is a longtime political activist artist, who was in Raw magazine, Art Spiegelman and Francoise Mouly's art comics magazine, and she's still working on World War III after all these years. And so I think you'll see some of the most lively use of comics that you may find in there, and it's just the best kept secret. And I recommend checking it out. And you can find it online. We have a website, but if you look up World War III Illustrated, on the latest cover is by Jose Munoz, who did Sin City. Yeah, for that. Yeah. He's 75 years old, Italian. One of the leading, I wouldn't say alternate, but one of the European comic artists who I revere, who had a huge influence on Frank Miller's
Absolutely.
Sin City.
Yeah.
The style of Sin City, when everybody's, I can't believe Frank Miller came up with this thing. It's like, take a look at Jose Munoz.
There it is.
And then you if you're wondering where that came out of the blue, it didn't come out of the blue.
That's right.
Which is it's not a negative reflection on Miller. That's part of what we're supposed to do.
That's
where
right.
We look around and see.
I'm definitely interested in checking out World War III. And by the way, if you're watching this episode, you should check it out too. So moving away from work for a second, can you give me 2 things that you have been nerding out on? And that's an open-ended question. So interpret it as you will.
Okay. Well, I mean, certainly nerding out on insects. So I'm reading all these books about insects, and I'm that is just bottomless for going. I can go down that road pretty far. I've been interested in this. That was actually predating my enthusiasm for comics. Was I wanted to be an entomologist, and I just got, I don't know why, but I mean, probably the same thing that drew me to comics was and stamp collecting was this colorful thing, that like caught my eye. I mean, some people have a musical inclination or theater. I'm definitely visually oriented, and so insects are just such a visually amazing thing. And so I'm just exploring that, and it's such a deep dive that kind of goes on and on. I still, I still look at comics plenty. Well, actually, here's an example of one. But what I've been in my super nerding out, and you can post this. I'm trying to draw a bug a day.
A bug a day keeps
it keeps me from thinking about Trump.
Yeah.
different kinds of insects, and parasites.
Awesome.
Robo knows all about those.
Parasites, yeah. That's how I keep my figure.
Let's see, what else am I nerding out on? That's now my primary focus, and so that that kind of bleeds into a lot of different areas, and that's taking up most of my nerd attention.
Okay, so real quick, so what about you look back on your years of work? What would you say is your proudest moment, or whether it's a piece of work or an award or?
Wow. Okay. I'd probably my daughter, but if I have to go down that road.
Well, you have to say that, no?
Neck and neck with my wife.
There it is. Yeah.
I mean, career-wise, I mean, to tell you the truth, I would definitely say this Cullman Fellowship, it would be way up there.
That's pretty huge.
Although it's extremely reduced because of COVID, so the library is kind of empty, and that we have to wear masks and all the interactions, as I was saying, that all of that is curtailed. But it's a pretty monstrous honor that to be able to do comics in an environment like that, where I'm shoulder to shoulder with MacArthur, Pulitzer Prize winning, bureau chiefs, and so I'm in the midst of probably the biggest honor in that way. But there's so many things along the way. I was thrilled to win the Eisner for my book Ruins.
I can imagine.
And I so thoroughly wasn't expecting to that I was at the door so I could make my quick exit.
There you go.
And I was like, wait,
beat the traffic.
And I very foolishly wrote no speech whatsoever, forgot to thank anybody, and talked about Trump. It was before the election, and I just said, if in a bizarro world somehow that Donald Trump is elected president and he builds this stupid wall that he's talking about, you'll find me on the Mexican side.
There you go.
Which then I wanted to pull back from and say, no, I can't, because I want to hang out with the comic book crowd, and they're on this side of the ball.
That's right.
And besides that, got to stick around and fight, fight back Trump. And
that's a cool
circumstances. So, but yeah, so that, I wasn't at a complete loss. And John Lewis won one of the Eisners that year for the March, and he was there, so that was also fantastic to get to stand holding our Eisners together. But I just feel in so many ways that there's so many different things along the line that have been just having a career at all in comics whatsoever is I still can't believe it. So I'm thrilled about that.
I found the Afikoman 3 Pesachs in a row back in the 90s, and I'm pretty proud of that.
That is pretty amazing. You got that. You got the gelt and everything, right?
All the gelt.
Chocolate gelt.
I'm wondering what upcoming projects you'd like to tell us about as a last question.
Well, as the pandemic was rising, I read Camus' The Plague, and I thought, that'd be a good thing to adapt. And I reached out to the Camus estate, and they said, "Oh well, could you show us like what you would do with the book?" They're in France. And I spent about a month working up a proposal and doing a bunch of artwork, and then it went into a giant hole, and they haven't responded. So they may yet respond, and I may end up doing that project. But my focus is on this project called Intersections, where insects, uppercase spells insects, but intersections is the will be about all this back and forth between insects and humans, and I'm going to look at it in terms of how insects can bring us together, because we all hate. I like mosquitoes. That it'll be all these people like slapping themselves in different languages going on. So together, see. So that's kind of the autobiography, and at the end, the mosquitoes like going, "Got away."
Nice.
I want you to know, I think it's cool. So I'm not making fun, but it is kind of a surprise. I was not expecting you to be the insect guy.
Oh, actually, then I'd have to scold you for not reading Ruins, because in my book Ruins, I'm following the monarch butterfly coming from Canada down to Mexico as a through line, and the main character, and it's not a real scold, there's so many hours in the day, and the main character is an entomologist. He's lost his job at the museum, and so he's really interested in insects, so I got to put my nerdy insect enthusiasm through him.
Awesome.
The chapter, the way it's broken up, the Ruins is broken up, is every other chapter goes back to the monarch butterfly, making its way down, and which you'll be able to bring up in post-production. And it's all that whole stream leading to making it to Mexico. Which when we lived in Mexico in 2006 2008. My daughter got on a project of studying the monarch butterfly, and we raised them. And then we went to this one particular spot in Mexico, which they only discovered in fairly relatively recent times, where like 11 million of them come to one forest. And you walk, and it's like, you look on the ground and the shadows of them flying by. It's I don't know. There's a visual I find that the beauty of that, my interest in art and all that, they all kind of connect. And I'm very interested in general in not drawing lines between a lot of different art forms. That's the thing that's always kind of bothered me, is that fine arts is this highfalutin thing, and comics was low art. And, that was another one of the best kept secrets about comics, is that we're doing an art form that I knew in my bones, and still do, is one of the most difficult art forms, but also it absolutely can knock down, it can stand on the wall next to fine art any day of the week.
Agreed.
And that in fact, what we've seen happening as the, like the receptors of the fine art world went, well, maybe there is some, they accepted Robert Crumb into, the modern art and Art Spiegelman a bit. And, there's some of that, but that there's a lot more narrative things going on in fine art, you see. And narrative is, it's a necessary step in, in a lot of different art forms. And that the interest in that has really exploded. And, we knew that the whole time. And when I was in art school at Pratt, there were no comics courses. School of Visual Arts had some comics courses, but they were like a technical school preparing you for work. So they were not the fine art school as much as, say, Pratt was. But there were a handful of us that were at Pratt. Dan Klaus was there at the same time that I was there. Kent Williams was there. There was a number of, I think John Van Fleet was there, and anyway, it's all at the same time. So we were all interested in comics, and it was like super obvious that this was an amazing art form, but there weren't any teachers there to say, yeah, that's a good idea. They were more discouraging than that, but that made it all the more like the joy of the inside story. And it was there's that piece of me that wishes that it didn't become as utterly, like the cultural explosion that it is. Like, I mean, I went to San Diego Comic-Con or the New York Comic-Con, it was like a few thousand people or a few hundred people. And if only I'd bought that Action Comics, God, that was available. And of course, I always was like, my financial situation was always way behind that. Like, it was like, it's $100. I can't spend $100 on that.
Yeah, imagine.
It's $1 million.
Yeah.
I was seeing when some guy bought Action Comics #1 and for $1,000 something. It was an Esquire.
Pennies on the dollar.
That's crazy.
It's like everybody was like, "Oh, that's insane."
Yeah.
But
why would you ever buy a comic? Yeah.
You could retire off that comic.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Friendly Neighborhood Nerds. That is Peter Kuper. Had a great time. Thank you so much, Mr. Kuper, for joining us. I know everybody's busy. But I mean, that's it. Does anybody have any last questions? Because if not, go ahead and.
I hope that I certainly hope this will open the door for a lot of the people who view your show to check out some of these things that they might not have otherwise thought
absolutely
were of interest to them.
Absolutely. All right, guys, don't forget to wear your mask, wash your hands, stay socially distanced until this BS is over. You guys take it easy.
Because of the threats. Thank you for watching Judah, Robo, and Ree. We talk about comics, movies, and TV. Sometimes we have notable guests, and sometimes it's just us. But we're also cool.